CashFlow Diary Podcast, episode 185.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the CashFlow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other CashFlow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the CashFlow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today. What we're going to talk about today is, well, one of those necessary skills. We've talked about it before. We're going to talk about it again, and I'm going to keep talking about it until you go, you know what? I can't wait to do more of it. It could be a long, long time. Because here's something that I'd like to share with you. Nothing happens until there's a sale. I'll say that again. Nothing happens until there's a sale, period. You're like, well, Jay, do I really have to? I just want to do real estate. I just want to invest. I promise you, it's all a part of it. And it's a necessary skill set for many entrepreneurs. You want to be that entrepreneur, your business must do sales. Now, I didn't say you must be the salesperson, although you likely are. I'm saying your business must do sales. And today's guest is going to help us with that. He has Boss Academy Radio. He also has a new academy out there to help more of us become better salespeople, which is cool because anytime you can gain additional skill sets, that makes you more valuable to the marketplace. Obviously, today's guest is an entrepreneur as well as a sales coach, and he's got a ton of valuable insight to share with you and I. So help me welcome Mr. Paul Kirch. Paul, you there?
I am, Jay. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Nice talking to you again.
As always. Absolutely.
All right. So I tend to ask everybody the same first question, which you may not know right now, and that's okay. Don't get nervous. Don't get nervous. Here's the deal. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs, of course, you are one of them, a lot like yesterday's superheroes. So, you could say Ant-Man and, Batman and, Wonder Woman. They're superheroes. And I think entrepreneurs are very similar. We get dressed up. Sometimes we put on a mask and cape, and we go around using our special skills and abilities to help people solve their problems. That's what we do. Also, like, superheroes, before Wonder Woman had, Wonder, and, Black Widow was out there doing the things that she does. Before all that, they were typically just normal people. Something happened to them, and then they decided to use their skill sets out there in the field. That simply means they have an origin story. So, what we would really like to know is, before you had the radio, before you had the academy, before you were doing what you were doing today, who is Paul Kirch?
That's a great question, Jay. Well, I started my career off in the marketing research industry, and I spent about 10 years at the world-famous Gallup organization. We were doing telephone survey. My first years were spent on the phones, calling people, doing consumer surveys, and bothering people at work, doing executive interviews. And it was a great experience. I didn't know anything about the radio. All I knew was a friend told me that, hey, there's this job. It's near the campus. A lot of cute girls work there. That's all I needed to hear. And so I came on board. Learned a lot about the research industry in the trenches doing that. Moved up in the company into various operations roles. Spent 10 years there. But I knew my passion was really getting out and talking to people, and I thought sales was the direction. I really wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't have the courage at the time. I was married to a paycheck, and I really wanted to own my own business, but I just wasn't ready. I tried a couple of ventures with some friends, but it just never was something we took seriously. And so I went into sales, which I felt was the most entrepreneurial role possible. So I left Gallup and got an opportunity to go work for one of their large suppliers. And it was a great learning experience. I got recruited away about a year later by another firm that exposed me to a guy that was a great mentor, sales leader, really taught me that it wasn't just about me going out and talking and trying to force somebody to buy into my ideas, but really about building relationships, earning trust. And so I spent several years in sales and then sales leadership, running sales organizations before I decided to go out and start my own company. And for me, the catalyst was I was actually working for a company that I loved. I was running the sales department. My wife was running operations. We were just having a blast. Every day we'd wake up excited about going in. And then we got acquired by a firm from overseas. And day one, the culture changed. They micromanaged us to death. They took us from a place where we loved going to a place we absolutely hated. And here's a guy that had spent his whole career wanting to own a company, but was married to a paycheck, kept moving up, making more money. And the more money I made, the more I thought that was out of reach. Well, when this company acquired us, I stayed on board almost a year running their U.S. sales before I realized that it just wasn't going to be something where I was ever going to be happy. I had a wife who went from waking up smiling, ready to go into work, to Sunday nights she's crying because we had to go in the next day because we just hated the culture so much and everything had changed. And so one of us had to leave. And because I was in sales, I felt I could go replace my income a lot easier than her. And so I negotiated out of my contract. My wife was 8 months pregnant. Now, I wanted to go start a company, but I wasn't ready to do it because I had a wife who was very risk averse, and I thought, she's never going to buy into this. I took a couple of job interviews, got offered jobs, turned them down, and my wife looks at me and she goes, look, you either need to take something or go start this company you've been talking about because it's time. You need to take care of your family. And she was right. And so with her support, I went out, and day one, I had a couple of clients because I had some relationships I was able to leverage, and started a sales training, sales coaching organization where I leveraged all this experience I'd gained and wanted to really go out and help others. And that company is called Actus Sales Intelligence and is still up and running today, 6 years later. And I'm just really having a blast doing what I do.
Got it. Well, there were a couple of things in there that I want to make sure that people hear, because there was an entire transformation that you went through in what you just shared with us. I mean, obviously your motivation for going to work where you did was unique, to say the least. But at the beginning, you said something that I thought was interesting. You said you didn't have the courage to be the entrepreneur that you knew was inside. Expound upon that just a little bit to help us understand what you mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a really small town. I had a father who was a teacher, a mother that was a stay-at-home mom. And in the town I grew up in, there was no real examples of entrepreneurship. I had an uncle who was a really successful business owner and entrepreneur. He'd owned several companies. And I really looked up to him and admired him in a lot of ways. But I didn't feel like I grew up with the exposure of how and what I needed to do to be an entrepreneur. So I always had this fear in the back of my mind. And, there's something about a paycheck for some people that it's just a really comfortable thing. And that's what it became for me. At one point when you're first, you're earning your few dollars and it's coming in, it just doesn't seem like there's enough. And it just doesn't seem like it goes far enough. And then you start to make more money. And you oddly enough, you're going, geez, I'm making all this much more money and it still doesn't go very far. But there's still a comfort that comes every 2 weeks when that check was coming. And it's something that really, when I was ready, I didn't have a clear vision on what I wanted to do. So that led to fear. And then when I wasn't ready and I had ideas in my head of what I wanted to do, I wasn't ready because I just was comfortable.
Yeah.
And I think comfort, somebody said it to me the other day. I interviewed somebody who started their business when they were 18. And he said, look, he goes, I have a lot of respect for people that start as an entrepreneur later in life because they have so much to lose and so much to risk. And here I am, a guy who's got a house, a mortgage payment, a wife who's 8 months pregnant, and I leave a job that's got a secure paycheck, even though I wasn't happy, to go start a company where I spent a year without really earning any money. I didn't pay myself for almost a year because that's what it takes in the beginning. So obviously if I'd have done it when I was 18, Yeah, it would have been scary, but it wouldn't have been as much risk. But I wasn't ready when I was 18.
Well, and that brings up a great, question in that the concept of, are you saying then, in your opinion, that it's easier to be an entrepreneur when you're younger, simply for no other reason than the fact that you have, quote unquote, less people, less mouths to feed, usually at that age?
It's easy in retrospect to say something like that's easier. The reality is it's never easy if you don't have that mindset of clear clarity. This is what I want to do. This is why I want to do it, and have that vision. But I will tell you that as a quote unquote adult, if I have to admit I've grown up, Jay, it's funny to look back on that. And I would say it would have been easier if I knew what I know today. But at the time, no, it just wasn't. I wasn't ready.
Yeah. The funny thing is I was just having this conversation with my oldest daughter, who is started her own way of earning some money a number of years ago. So she doesn't really ask us for money because she makes her own crochet items and whatnot online. And now that she's moved into an apartment, now that she's got roommates, now that she's at college, it's like not enough money the way that she was doing it. So I'm like, yeah, it's not, darling. What are you going to do? You're going to go make it happen, or are you going to go get a job? What do you want? And she doesn't want to go get a job. So I'm watching her go through this transition at 18. And I'm like, and I told her just yesterday, I'm like, look, you may think your rent is a lot now, but let me tell you this. Your expenses are never going to be any lower than they are today. They're only going to go up. So if you're going to try to figure this thing out and scale it, now is the time. So she's been putting up her store and making it happen. It's just been pretty funny watching her go through that. But there's something else that you said that I've heard many times when people say, they ask me the question, and the way it comes out is I'm just like, wow, it says it's a very similar concept of the way that you were originally thinking about sales in general. And because you said you were someone, you didn't want to be someone that had to force someone into buying into your idea. And people ask me all the time is, Jay, how do I convince an investor to give me their money, or to buy my deal, or to invest with me? I'm sensing and I'm guessing that your concept of sales has changed since then.
Oh my gosh, yeah. When I first started in sales, I got handed a job. Gallup was a great place for me to build a foundation. It gave me a great name. When I left on good terms. In fact, my boss was the one who introduced me to the company I went to work for, because he knew that I wanted to move into sales, and there just wasn't an opportunity where I was living at the time. And I got this job under a guy that I've become great friends with and I have a lot of respect for, but he wasn't the ultimate sales leader in terms of giving me guidance, helping really form me. He kind of was the mindset of, here's your PC, here's what I do, now go do it. And I really thought that my job was to go out and convince people, persuade people on buying from me. It's like, this is what I have. And I did okay. I did well with it, but it was not until I got my next job where I got recruited away by somebody, like I said, became a great mentor. And he really beat us over the head with the idea of, look, part of your job is to always be a resource. And I think that's such a great message. At the time, I didn't necessarily understand the power of it. But his concept of always be a resource was, look, you got somebody that comes to you looking for a job, help them, make an introduction. You know somebody out there that could benefit from one of your client relationships, make an introduction. Always be there to support people beyond just offering your services and your wares. And I tell you what, that was a turning point in my career. And I also was very blessed to work for a couple of companies at that time that really supported me getting involved in the industry I was working in. I was in the marketing research industry, and my first day on the job with that company when I went in sales was, they said, hey, we want you to go to this networking event. And then we want you to go to this conference. And all of a sudden I'm thrown in this world, and I started volunteering and started getting exposed to these people that were very experienced and successful, and they were coming to me for advice. And all of a sudden in my career, my turning point was when I realized that it's about giving and putting yourself out there, earning people's trust and respect. It's not about force feeding your message down their throat.
Yeah. And it's funny how it's a very commonly held misconception. I think that came out right. Commonly held misconception, because I didn't want to, quote unquote, be a salesperson. I know how people treat salespeople, and I'm like, I can't convince anybody of anything. I don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
But I'm down to help people all day long. If you got a problem and I have the ability to help ease the pain, give you some relief, point you in the direction of a solution, I'm your guy. I'll do that. And it took a while for me to grasp that concept. Now, in every entrepreneur's life, and I think this is also true for you because you hinted at it, and we have what I call that superhero moment. It's the moment where, okay, you wake up, you realize, oh my gosh, something has to change. Maybe I do have a superpower. I've got this idea in the back of my head and I want to offer it to the marketplace. And that idea, as you said, was, it was taking up residence, sitting back in the, recesses of the mind, not really doing anything yet. And then you have this moment where, unlike most people, your wife said, get out there and make it happen, which I'm like, hey, well, that's kind of cool. But you still
it was amazing.
I can only imagine. I can only imagine.
She was so risk averse, and I love that about her. I mean, she's very, very conscientious about money, and she's very careful about spending. I mean, she's never had a credit card that she hasn't paid off every month in her entire life, because that's the way she just views money and finance. And so when she said, go for it, that was like, wow, how can you ignore that? You got somebody who's afraid to be without and says, go do this because I believe in you. It's a nice message.
And that's where I was going with that. And here's the thing, though. The superhero still has to develop the courage to put on the cape, put on the tights, and go make that happen. I mean, because that was the very thing you said you didn't have at the beginning, is the courage. But now you got it. And I think we have our answer, but where did the source of that, was the source of that courage solely just your wife saying go, or was there some additional help that was required to actually make that happen?
When I left, I started writing articles, and especially when I started my company, social media was one of the areas where I really wanted to embark. And so I was doing some blogging. I wrote an article for a publication that was called The Cowardly Entrepreneur. And I based that it's like a spin-off of The Wizard of Oz. But, I was this guy who was married to a paycheck, afraid to go out on his own. And then at one point, I found my path, and, I found that it was always within me. And that's such a great message in retrospect. And I interviewed somebody on my show, which Boss Academy Radio, that had written a book called Getting There. And Getting There is a book of mentors. And it was all these people like Warren Buffett and Anderson Cooper and all these people that had shared their stories. And they're all about the failures they had long before they were successful, which is easy in retrospect to look back at that and say, wow, Warren Buffett, he was afraid of public speaking, and then that became one of his strengths. It's really inspiring to see that. But I think for me, what it was I always had it within me. I just needed somebody to push me over the ledge. And pushing me over the ledge meant that I kind of like Tony Robbins always talks about burning the boats. I burned the boats. I was getting job offers and could not stomach the idea of going back to work for someone else because of what we had just gone through, the experience. I couldn't stomach the idea of that. So for me, that was not an option. So if that's not an option, being homeless wasn't an option. At least it wasn't one that I was really enticed by.
I personally don't recommend it.
And I know your story, and I know you've gone through some challenges. But for me at the time, it's like, what choice do I have but to go for it? And if this is what I've always wanted to do, you need to it's like that idea of doing bungee jumping. And you got to take that first step, right? You got to take that first leap off. But once you do, once you're falling, then you realize, man, this feels good. Well, I just needed to take that first step. And then there was no looking back.
You know, I was with you until you mentioned bungee jumping, man. I have this thing, like, there's this ride at Six Flags Magic Mountain. It's called Lex Luthor. Look it up. It is nothing but one of the tallest straight drops on the planet, and I don't know why I was even willing to get on that thing. And then just last weekend, my 7-year-old says, "Hey, Dad, 7, let's get on Tower of Terror." I'm like, what? What is wrong with my children? I mean, that whole idea of free falling like that. But when you mention it in the context of entrepreneurship, I know there's a number of people who probably, the way that I react on that ride, screaming like a little schoolgirl, completely out of control, not even sure if I'm going to live, is probably the very feeling that they're afraid of and don't want to feel and don't feel like they can get through. So if I'm feeling that way, that free fall, like I'm about to bungee jump, yeah, there's a cord, but I'm not really sure how strong it is. I don't know if I'm going to bounce and how that's going to work out. How do I deal with that and still go forward, Paul? All right. Yeah, I'm not bungee jumping anytime soon, in case you were wondering. At least not that type of bungee jumping. It's another Monday, so we need to announce a winner. And for those of you wondering, you just go to CashFlowDiaryPodcast.com. You have to rate and review the podcast, rate and review. And you are now always entered when we give away something this way. So today's winner will be receiving another copy of the Cashflow board game that you could use to go out there, increase your financial intelligence, and most importantly, learn to educate to dominate. Today's winner is Julio. So when you go to the CashFlowDiaryPodcast.com, when you go there, make sure you leave the written review. The written review and the username is what I'm going to announce, and I am announcing Julio. Julio, send us an email to info@CashFlowDiary.com, info@CashFlowDiary.com with your details, and we'll get the game out to you. Now, those of you who have been long-term podcast listeners, you are probably still listening at this particular point in the show, which is great. And if you missed it on the prior episodes, I am now giving something to every podcast listener. Send a text message to 72000, 72000. That's 72000. The word is book. The keyword is book, BOOK. And I will give you a free copy of Cashflow Diary, 10 Steps to Creating Wealth in Any Economy, in the ebook format. It'll get emailed directly to you. So when you send in the text message to 72000, again, that's 72000, keyword is book. Go ahead and confirm, type in yes. When you respond, you'll get the link to be able to go ahead and download your copy of the book. So let's go back to Paul now and see what he meant about free falling and that whole bungee jumping thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think about those rides, and I think you're talking about Lex Luthor, Drop of Doom. Drop of Doom in itself is part of the problem with that name right there, right?
Yeah.
But even if your whole experience is fear, you know, during that ride, afterwards, there has to be a moment where you realize, man, you just accomplished something. You overcame a fear. I was afraid of swimming. You know, I almost drowned when I was a kid. And I never really learned to swim as a child, and I always regretted that. My mom sent me to swimming lessons, and I remember I freaked out one day in the water, and she never made me go back. And I always regretted that she never made me go back. I always wanted that, you know, something that I could have put behind me. So as an adult, I learned to swim. I took swim lessons, and you know, today I have a swimming pool, and I'm teaching my kids to swim along with my wife, and it's really amazing to see. That's something that in the past just used to frighten me. And it's such a feeling of accomplishment. So even that ride, if it's scary as all get out, once it's over, there has to be a feeling like, wow, I just did that. I'm not going to do it again, but I did that. And I think for some people, that's what entrepreneurship is. Not that the idea of I'll never do it again, but once you get past some of those moments of fear, it doesn't mean it's not hard. I mean, every day I learned something new. I never had any idea I was going to become a QuickBooks expert. Who thought that I would become this guy that knew how to do accounting through QuickBooks? But it's something I had to learn until I could get somebody to outsource it to, a bookkeeper, and now I have an accountant. So all those things are great, but every day there's a challenge. Your first letter from the IRS when you missed a payment or you missed a deadline that you didn't realize existed.
Yeah.
My heart would sink when I'd see something from the Internal Revenue Service. Half the time you'd open it and it was nothing. Other times it was a notice. But my point is that stuff was scary, but the liberation and the fact that, you know what? I'm controlling my destiny. I'm in charge, not someone else. For me, that mattered. And I take nothing away from anybody who says, I don't want that. I'm comfortable working for somebody else the rest of my life. But it was something that was killing me inside. And once I took that leap of faith, I don't know. For me, there's just no going back.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. I mean, you become, the phrase that I heard was psychologically unemployable.
That's great.
That's just what it is. You just like, you know what? It may be rough today. It may not be what I want. And it's not going well, but at least it's not that. And you're okay with it and you figure it out. And it's funny how you mentioned there are so many skills that you don't think you need to know, or you may not just be aware that you need to know when you start this, entrepreneurship thing. And then you're like, okay, well, you want to look around and say, who's going to do that? And the answer is you,
Yes, sir.
Whether it's QuickBooks or sales or anything, you're like, somebody's got to make that happen. Yeah, that's you. Somebody does. And it's you. So tell us, share with us, if you will, a little bit of why. I mean, when you're taking back this control, you have the ability to do whatever you want. Why help individuals in the arena of sales?
Wow, that's a great question. I'd say that sometimes you fall into things out of necessity. Sometimes you fall into things out of comfort zone. I had been doing sales leadership, sales training, and I worked in the marketing research industry around all these companies that most of them had never really had any kind of sales infrastructure. And then they all felt they needed it, and they started adding sales staff. Because our industry, when I was actively involved in research, which I still am, I still have a lot of clients in that space. But that industry really grew out of companies where the CEO was working with another CEO. It wasn't the kind of sales that exists today. And I knew I could help some of these companies that had been around for a long time and that were trying to get their feet wet. So for me, it was kind of low-hanging fruit. And it was something I was comfortable with. I had become passionate about the sales practice. Like I said, I had a good mentor, but then I started becoming a sponge. I was reading everything. I was going to sales trainings. I went through Sandler training and some other sales coaching programs, and really became in love with the idea of influencing and connecting with people. Not necessarily, if you take and break down the words, the term sales, not about forcing myself upon someone or pushing my wares, but really about engaging and building trust, building relationships. I still have people that call me 10 years later that reach out to me and ask me for advice, even though they're not going to hire me in my business. And I'm happy to share that because I give as much as I can because I know it's going to pay off tenfold. So for me, it was really kind of what I was comfortable with.
Got it. Well, yeah. I mean, that's a good way to find the thing you're supposed to get done. And at the end of the day, sometimes even if you have to develop a new skill or get comfortable with something new, that's completely fine too. So here's
and I'll tell you, Jay. I mean, I don't mean to cut you off there, but I've never stopped learning. In fact, it was interesting. When I started my company, I was so busy doing all the administrative stuff and the other stuff. I wasn't out selling the way that I had for years, and became very much, I guess I'll say rusty, because I hadn't been forced to do the stuff that I had because I had people calling me.
Right.
And it was kind of a nice luxury. But then all of a sudden, it's interesting. I started my business in 2009. The economy was down. My phone's ringing off the hook. 2010, things started to turn around. The economy was looking better. The phone stopped ringing because you know what? People don't pay as much, or they don't go out and look for sales training, sales coaching, sales leadership when things are good. They do it when things are bad. But then when things are bad, they're reluctant to spend the money. So it has become one of these kind of like ugly cycles. So I've been forced to go back into selling at times when things are slow. And it's good because I always want to keep my skills up, and I'm always studying what's new out there, what's working, and connecting with other sales leaders because I want to learn what's working for them.
Indeed, indeed. And in fact, I'm going to ask this question because I've got a number of places that I go to when I want to study a salesperson, and I'm just curious. I'll share where mine are, but before I do, I'm curious to know if you have like some special places that you go specifically to just study the interaction between customer and salesperson.
I don't necessarily have anything in particular. I will tell you what I've done. I do my research and do my homework. In the beginning, I used to follow Jeffrey Gitomer, who is a well-known author. He wrote the Sales Bible, Little Red Book of Selling. Great practices. He teaches selling from a real, hey, this is the stuff that works. And it's funny, I saw his business shift. He went from this guy that was all about you need to do this to engage people to, hey, you need to be on social media. So he started really pushing the idea of using writing and social media. And I saw that shift. So I was like, okay, great stuff. I want to keep following him, but who else? So I started doing my homework and looked for who was the best. And so there's a few people that I follow. And quite frankly, LinkedIn, I mean, you cannot go on a page on LinkedIn without seeing some salesperson on there. And you can find people that have a lot of followers, that are writing a lot of articles, and you just pay close attention to what they're doing.
Yep, got it. And it's interesting. The more I talk to more people, that more I keep hearing LinkedIn, which I think is interesting, being that it's something I've spent some of the least time learning at the end of the day. But some of those, for those of you wondering, some of those other crazy places where I might be found actually studying a salesperson so that I can figure out what works, is I will QVC, HSN, the shopping networks. I mean, those are some of the best salespeople I know of.
Yeah, that's that's interesting.
Because, I mean, think about it, Paul. That little bauble that you have no interest in, if you happen to stay on the channel just a little too long, you too might want to buy one for 3 easy payments of $97.
Especially if it's 3 a.m. in the morning. That's a dangerous time for me to be with a credit card, let me tell you. I've been tempted to buy the bamboo steamer more than once, I will tell you that much.
Exactly. And there's a skill set there. Another place I will go is a car dealership. Because again, it's another interaction. I will purposely put myself on a car dealership just to see how they interact with me, or believe it or not, a timeshare presentation. Because, I mean, if there's any environment that's hostile to the salesperson, especially at the beginning, it's the timeshare presentation. But 90 minutes later, everybody leaves happy, $20,000 lighter, and ready to go on vacation somehow. And that to me that's a miracle. I'm like, how do they do that?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story, and those are great points. I tend to follow more sales leaders, sales coaches than I do actual salespeople, but I think there's something to be said for getting in the real world and seeing how people interact. When I had mentioned I had gone from one sales job, got recruited away by this gentleman who became a mentor. When I started that job, he lived in Boston, and we were working for a company out of Rochester, New York. I'm living in Seattle. He's living in Boston. And so I came out and spent a week with him and stayed near him. And then we just every day would go over to his house and do training and go out in the field. And one of the things he did one day, he goes, you're going to go buy a car. And I said, what? And he takes me to a dealership, does not tell me what he wants from me. So I'm thinking that he wants to see how I handle the salesperson. And it was really uncomfortable. We're sitting there talking to this guy, and he goes, look, I don't want you to actually buy the car. He says, but I want you to go through this practice like you're buying the car. And so we sat there, and we're dealing with the sales guy, and I'm the whole time thinking I'm being judged. I'm like, okay, what's he looking for? What's he looking for? We get done, and he goes, so what'd you think? And I start rattling off, my reaction. And he goes, I really wanted you to pay attention to how he handled himself. And it was such an eye-opener. And to see how this guy had handled himself in a sales practice, and he was really pushing us hard. And then we went to a retail store where he knew the person, and we went in there, and it was like this night and day experience. And he just had so many great lessons he gave, but I'll tell you, that was the most uncomfortable experience I've ever had in a car dealership, but one of the biggest eye-openers.
Through that experience, though, when you're in that situation, you first of all, I commend him for putting you not even telling you the rules. I totally love that, because that's very true with almost every prospect interaction. No one really knows unless somebody sets the rules. But the observing them, I'm assuming you learned a lot right there. Very real at that time.
Absolutely.
Now, interestingly enough, what would you say? I mean, because you and I, we've had a lot of real world experience, thrown into the trenches, etc. I mean, I've even done things like call literally out of the white pages. All right.
Oh yeah, I've done that too.
Yeah, exactly. So for those who just probably turned a little ghostly when they heard the idea of calling out of the white pages, and maybe have some, anxiety around the whole concept of selling anything, how could you help them reframe what it is that must happen for the business to exist and grow, so that they could actually feel comfortable going to do it? How should we think about it?
That's great, Jay. It's such a great question, and thanks for asking that. My company, Actus Sales Intelligence, is really designed to help the professional salesperson or the company that has a sales team. But I vowed when I started my company that, here's this guy that had spent all this time being afraid to go out and start his own company. And when I finally did it, it just meant so much. It was so liberating. And I wanted to help other people in that situation. So I came up with a concept called Boss Academy. And bossacademy.com is something that is really becoming exactly what I'd envisioned, a resource for the entrepreneur. I have a show called Boss Academy Radio, which I was blessed to have you on as a guest. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And that whole concept is built around the idea of helping the entrepreneur engage with people, sell their wares, sell their services, and connect with people in a really engaging, positive way. And we've got an expert network where we've got other people that are contributing from different avenues. But I'll tell you, one of the greatest things that ever happened to me in my career was something that was at the time maybe one of the most embarrassing. I was in California, and my boss at the time had come out to do some client visits with me. And I had a client that we'd gotten a little bit of work from them. There was so much opportunity. These people had so much business, and I wanted a bigger piece of it. I had a good relationship with the person who was responsible for selecting vendors, but it was just not one of those things where I really felt we were getting even close to the business we should. And I knew that if I could find out some information about where she was sending some of this other work, it was going to make the difference because I could really address it. So I'm in this meeting. We're sitting in a boardroom. It's her and her boss and my manager, and we're sitting there having this conversation. I get the opportunity. We're finally on the topic, and I ask the question that I've been wanting to ask. And next thing you know, we're wrapping up the meeting. I'm out in the parking lot, and I'm feeling really good about this meeting. And my manager looks at me, and he has a look on his face where I could tell he was a little bit frustrated. And he says, "So let me ask you, what'd she say when you asked her that question?" I said, "Well, you know what?" I said, "She didn't answer it." He goes, "No, Paul, she did. You talked right over the top of her. She gave you your answer, but you weren't listening." And it was at that moment that all the books I'd read, everything I'd studied, I realized that I was my own worst enemy. The idea of asking a question and not learning to shut up and listen was such a detriment. So I will tell anyone out there, today your job is, as much of anything, You need to understand what your buyer's needs are, and often that requires you to get them engaged in the conversation, ask them questions. But if you don't learn to stop talking and learn to listen, you're never going to get the full value out of that conversation. Because sometimes we're so fixated on the next thing we want to ask that we forget to stop and listen. So I will tell you that those are two things that anyone can get better at, and anyone can transform the way they do business if they just get better at asking questions, asking good, solid questions, and then learning to listen and get comfortable with the silence. You know, if you ask a question and they don't answer right away, get comfortable with that silence, because I'll tell you, it's just like the old negotiating mindset. Whoever talks first loses. It's kind of true. And so if you get uncomfortable because they haven't answered you and you go ahead and say something else, you just let them off the hook. And quite frankly, you're going to miss out the opportunity to really gain some insights.
Indeed. We obey what I call the 70-30 rule. Prospect speaks 70% of the time.
That's great.
Period. I love it. I love it 100%. So for those who have been listening and want to find out a little bit more about the resources that you've mentioned and yourself and what you're up to, what's going to be the best way for us to track
I would say that send people out to bossacademy.com, and there you're going to get an opportunity to hear great interviews, great insights. You're going to get exposure to our expert network, and you can also reach me there. If you want to reach me directly, you can always go out to Facebook and look up Boss Academy Radio, or you can email me at pkirch, PKIRCH, at bossacademy.com.
Excellent. And finally, let's pretend for a second that someone is, standing outside that superhero outfit store. They're picking out their tights. They're thinking about mask, maybe a cape, maybe not. But they got an idea, and they're ready. They think they're ready to move forward. They believe that, this is gonna be good. I can do it. All of those types of things, but there's still that little bit of hesitation. They unfortunately don't have a spouse who's pushing them out the door saying, "Go do it," but they can feel that internal yearning. What would you say to that person right now?
An idea in itself is not enough, but if you can tie it to your why do you want to do this, and get clarity around that, that can fuel a passion that will never hold you back. If I would have had that kind of clarity, there's no doubt I would have taken that leap years before that I did. But I didn't have that. Once I got clear, Tony Robbins always talks about get clear, get clarity. Well, sometimes clarity can be a detriment. And if you're somebody that takes an idea, you get some clarity on what you want, and you don't act upon it, you start to microanalyze everything, you're probably going to talk yourself out of it. Start taking action immediately. What does that mean? Start writing down your ideas. Start working on a plan. Who's the first person you can call? For me, I called some people day one, said, you know what, I'm going to do this. I want to pick up the phone and call some people, and I've got an idea. I had people that said, absolutely. You start this company, we're on board. So make some calls. Take some action.
Indeed. I like it. Being able to start from that strong position is definitely something that's useful. That probably limits some of that free fall.
Yeah. Well, and if if you back away from that ledge, there's a good chance you'll never go on that ride. And unfortunately, I've done it, and I've seen other people do it. But that's why I say I kind of equate it to that idea of taking that first step off. You get that bungee cord on your back. I don't care how scary it is. If you take that leap, you're going down. You're going to go on the ride. You might as well enjoy it. If you walk away from that ledge, you'll never go back.
Indeed. And just as a side note, for those that are curious, the Lex Luthor ride, Drop of Doom, is 400 feet. You get up to a terminal velocity of 85 miles per hour in 5 seconds, and those 5 seconds feel like an eternity. Nonetheless, one of the things that we've learned today from you, sir, has been that we can survive even if it's only 5 seconds. It could be a long 5 seconds, but it's completely okay. We can make it through it, and I definitely appreciate you taking the time to share with us your wisdom and insight here with us.
Thank you, Jay. And as always, it's a great pleasure to get to talk to you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It is time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean today? That means get over to Boss Academy Radio. Get over to Boss Academy because you know what? I'm guessing you're going to learn at least one new idea. Understand this. Everything that you read, listen to, learn, watch, attend, seminar, every networking event, the only goal you have is to learn one new idea. That's it. So long as you learn one new idea with everything that you interact, you will find yourself having learned a whole bunch of stuff over time. It's been fun talking to you guys today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.